The alarm screamed through the corridors of the Galactic Council station, a sound that hadn't been heard in over 300 cycles. Ambassador Kethvar's 4 eyes darted between the holographic displays showing red warnings across dozens of star systems. His breathing tubes fluttered with panic as he tried to process what he was seeing. "This cannot be accurate," he whispered to his aide, a young Vorthan female whose scales had turned pale blue with fear. "Run the diagnostics again. There must be an error in the sensors." The aide's claws clicked rapidly across the control interface, her movements jerky with nervous energy. "Ambassador, I've run the checks 17 times. The readings are correct. The humans they've gone silent. All of them. Every human colony, every human ship, every human outpost across 47 systems. Complete radio silence." Kethvar felt his heart skip several beats. In his 200 years of diplomatic service, he had never encountered anything like this. The humans, those impossible Deathworlders who had somehow clawed their way from their toxic planet to become one of the galaxy's most influential species, had simply vanished from all communications. "When did this begin?" he asked, though he dreaded the answer. "Approximately 6 standard hours ago, sir." The silence started at the edge of human space and moved inward like a wave. "The last transmission we received was from Earth itself, and even that was just a single message: 'We're done playing games.'" The ambassador's legs nearly gave out beneath him. He had been present at the council sessions where the humans had grown increasingly frustrated with galactic politics. For the past 50 cycles, they had watched as their proposals for humanitarian aid, environmental protection, and peaceful expansion were voted down by the older species who saw them as upstart newcomers. The humans had tried diplomacy. They had offered technology, resources, even military protection to species under threat. In return, they had received condescension, mockery, and outright hostility. The Council had passed resolution after resolution limiting human expansion, taxing their trade routes, and forcing them to accept refugees from failing civilizations while denying them representation proportional to their contributions. Kethvar remembered the last session clearly. The human ambassador, a stern woman named Sarah Chen, had stood before the assembled representatives and spoken with a calm that somehow felt more threatening than any shouted threat. "We have been patient," she had said. "We have followed your rules, respected your traditions, and submitted to your authority even when it made no sense. We have given more than we have received, helped more than we have been helped, and sacrificed more than any species should be asked to sacrifice. But there comes a point when patience becomes stupidity, when generosity becomes exploitation, and when cooperation becomes submission." The Ulterian representative had laughed at her words, his crystalline voice tinkling like breaking glass. "What will you do, human? Your species is barely 300 cycles old. You are children playing at being adults. You have no real power here." Sarachin had smiled then, and Kethvar still shivered when he remembered that expression. It hadn't been angry or threatening. It had been sad, disappointed, and somehow final. "You're right," she had said. "We are young. We are inexperienced in your games. Perhaps it's time we stop trying to play by rules written by people who never intended for us to win." Now, staring at the display showing the complete absence of human communication across nearly 50 star systems, Kethvar understood what that smile had meant. The humans hadn't threatened war or violence. They had simply left. "Sir," his aide interrupted his thoughts, "we're receiving priority transmissions from council members across the galaxy. They all want to know the same thing: where are the humans?" Kethvar straightened his formal robes and tried to compose himself. As the Council's senior intelligence officer, it was his responsibility to provide answers. The problem was, he had none. "Patch me through to the emergency session chamber," he ordered. "And send word to all department heads. I want every available resource focused on finding out what happened to the humans." The aide's scale shifted to an even paler shade. "Sir, there's something else. The Economic Analysis Department has been running projections on what human silence means for galactic trade. The preliminary numbers are concerning." "How concerning?" "The humans control or contribute to 63% of all medical research, 47% of agricultural innovation, and 32% of industrial manufacturing. Their shipping companies handle transportation for over 200 species. Their banks provide loans and financial services to half the civilizations in known space. If they've truly gone silent." Kethvar didn't need her to finish. The galactic economy would collapse within months. Entire species would face famine without human agricultural techniques. Medical breakthroughs that could save billions would halt overnight. The transportation networks that connected distant worlds would crumble. As he made his way to the emergency chamber, Kethvar passed viewport after viewport showing the usual busy traffic around the council station. Ships from hundreds of species went about their daily business, completely unaware that their universe had just fundamentally changed. The emergency session was already in chaos when he arrived. Representatives from the major species were shouting at each other in a dozen different languages, their various forms of panic creating a cacophony that hurt his hearing tubes. Chancellor Vexoth, an ancient Catherine whose shell showed the scars of 5 centuries, called for order with his ceremonial staff. Silence. We will address this crisis with dignity and proper procedure. The Ulterian representative who had mocked the humans just days earlier was notably less composed now. His crystalline features flickered with agitation. This is obviously some kind of primitive tantrum. Send a fleet to their systems and remind them of their obligations. With what fleet? Demanded Representative Yilton of the Nexari Collective. In case you've forgotten, the humans provide 70% of our defensive coordination. Their ships are faster than ours, their weapons more advanced, and their tactical knowledge superior. Even if we could mount an offensive, which we cannot, we would be attacking the very people who have been protecting our borders for the past 50 cycles. The truth of those words settled over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The humans hadn't just been contributors to galactic civilization. They had been its backbone, its immune system, its problem solvers and protectors. And everyone had been so busy treating them as junior members of the community that no one had stopped to consider what would happen if they simply walked away. Perhaps, suggested the Zilani ambassador, her tentacles writhing with nervous energy, we should consider why they left. The human representatives have been increasingly vocal about what they perceived as unfair treatment. Chancellor Vexotha's ancient eyes focused on her with displeasure. Are you suggesting we capitulate to their demands? The Council does not negotiate with those who abandon their responsibilities. Responsibilities? The Nexari representative's voice rose to a near shriek. What responsibilities did we give them that benefited anyone but us? They asked for fair representation, and we gave them token seats. They asked for protection of developing species, and we voted it down because it might interfere with our expansion plans. They asked for environmental protection standards, and we called them naive children who didn't understand real politics. Kethvar realized this was his moment to speak. He activated his voice amplifier and addressed the chamber. Distinguished colleagues, I believe we need to focus on the immediate crisis. My department has confirmed that human silence is complete and appears to be coordinated. This was not a sudden decision. This was planned. The chamber fell silent. The implications of his words were staggering. The humans hadn't left in anger or frustration. They had made a deliberate, calculated decision to withdraw from galactic civilization entirely. What are you saying? Chancellor Vexoth demanded. I'm saying that the humans have been preparing for this moment for cycles, possibly decades. The speed and coordination of their withdrawal suggests extensive planning and preparation. They knew exactly when and how they would leave, and they knew what the consequences would be. The Ulterian representative's crystalline form darkened. This is an act of war against the entire galaxy. No, Kethvar replied quietly. This is an act of divorce. The metaphor hit the chamber like a physical blow. A war could be fought, won, or lost. Negotiations could be attempted, compromises reached, treaties signed. But a divorce meant that one party had decided the relationship was fundamentally broken and beyond repair. Representative Yilton was the first to voice what everyone was thinking. How long do we have? Kethvar had been dreading that question. My economic analysis teams estimate that critical shortages will begin within 30 standard days. Food distribution networks will start failing in 60 days. Medical supply chains will collapse in 90 days. Complete economic breakdown. He paused, gathering courage for the final blow. 6 months. Maybe less. The chamber erupted again, but this time the panic was different. It was the panic of people who had suddenly realized they were standing on the edge of a cliff, and the ground beneath their feet was already starting to crumble. Chancellor Vexoth called for order again, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "Surely the humans will listen to reason. They cannot simply abandon billions of sentient beings to suffer. Can't they?" Kethvar asked quietly. "We've spent decades telling them they're too young, too naive, too emotional to understand real politics. We've dismissed their concerns about suffering and injustice as childish idealism. Perhaps they've finally learned to think like us." The terrible silence that followed those words was broken only by the continued arrival of urgent messages from across the galaxy. Every major trade route, every manufacturing center, every research facility that depended on human involvement was reporting the same thing: their human partners had vanished without explanation, leaving behind only empty facilities and cryptic messages about pursuing other opportunities. As the session continued into the night cycle, Kethvar found himself thinking about something the human ambassador had said months earlier, during a debate about trade regulations that would have severely disadvantaged human merchants. "You keep treating us like we need you more than you need us," Saracen had observed. Maybe it's time we tested that assumption. Now, looking at the chaos unfolding around him, Kethvar understood that the test had begun. And the results were becoming terrifyingly clear. The humans had been the glue holding galactic civilization together, and now they were gone. What came next would determine whether the galaxy could survive without them, or whether this moment would be remembered as the beginning of the end for thousands of species who had taken their guardians for granted. In the depths of space, human ships continued their silent journey toward unknown destinations, carrying with them the knowledge, skills, and resources that had made them indispensable. They had tried to be partners, allies, and friends. Now they would find out what it meant to be free. 3 weeks after the humans vanished, Captain Zulkar of the Meridian Trade Alliance received the distress signal that would change everything he thought he knew about the galaxy. His cargo ship, the Prosperity's Edge, had been struggling to maintain its usual route between the Centauri manufacturing hub and the vegan agricultural worlds without human coordination services. "Captain," his communications officer called out, her voice tight with confusion, "I'm picking up a transmission from the Kepler mining station. They're requesting immediate assistance." Zulkar's tentacles curled with irritation. The Kepler station was one of the most advanced mining operations in the galaxy, operated jointly by the Vorthan Empire and the Crystalline Consortium. It was also one of the facilities that had relied heavily on human technical expertise and equipment maintenance. "What kind of assistance?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Their primary life support systems are failing, sir. They're asking for emergency repair teams and medical supplies. Apparently, their human maintenance staff disappeared 3 weeks ago, and no one else knows how to operate the repair systems." Zulkar felt a chill run through his body. The Kepler station housed over 50,000 miners and support staff. If their life support failed completely, it would be the single largest disaster in recorded galactic history. "Set course for Kepler station, maximum speed," he ordered. "And send word to the Galactic Emergency Response Network. They need to know about this." What Zulkar didn't know was that similar disasters were unfolding across hundreds of star systems. On the agricultural world of New Harvest, automated farming systems designed by human engineers had begun malfunctioning. Without the humans to maintain them, crops were dying in the fields while millions faced starvation. The Vorthan couldn't fix the systems because they had never bothered to learn how they worked. On the research station orbiting Proxima Centauri, a breakthrough treatment for Zilani degenerative syndrome sat half completed in laboratories that no one else understood how to operate. The project had been led by human scientists working in partnership with Zilani researchers, but the humans had taken their knowledge with them when they left. In the Outer Rim territories, pirate attacks had increased by 300% as criminal organizations realized that the human patrol fleets were no longer protecting the trade routes. Species that had complained about human interference in their territorial disputes were now begging for help as wars that had been prevented for decades suddenly reignited. But perhaps the most telling incident occurred in the high-security medical facility on New Geneva, where Dr. Elizabeth Reeves had been working on a cure for the Kytherian plague that had been ravaging the outer colonies. She had been the lead researcher on the project for 5 years, making steady progress toward a breakthrough that could save millions of lives. When the human withdrawal began, Dr. Reeves had done something that would become legendary among the human diaspora. She had carefully documented every aspect of her research, created detailed instructions for continuing the work, and transmitted all of it to the Galactic Medical Council with a simple message: "Good luck." The Kytherian researchers who tried to continue her work quickly discovered that human medical methodology was unlike anything they had ever encountered. Where other species approached problems logically and systematically, humans seemed to make intuitive leaps that defied conventional wisdom. Dr. Reeves had been combining techniques from a dozen different fields in ways that no single species research team could replicate. Ambassador Kethvar learned about these mounting crises during his daily briefing session, which had become an increasingly grim ritual. Each day brought new reports of systems failing, projects abandoned, and disasters prevented only by the heroic efforts of species trying desperately to fill gaps they had never realized existed. "The situation is becoming untenable," reported his aide, her scales now a permanent shade of worry gray. "We're receiving distress calls faster than we can respond to them. The Economic Council estimates that we've already lost 40% of our industrial capacity, and that number is growing daily." Kethvar studied the holographic displays showing the spreading crisis. Red indicators marked failing systems across the galaxy like a disease spreading through the body of civilization itself. "What about our efforts to locate the humans? Any progress?" "None, sir. Our long-range sensors have detected no trace of their ships or colonies. It's as if they've vanished completely. Some analysts believe they may have left our local galactic region entirely." The possibility sent a shiver through Kethvar's body. If the humans had truly left for unknown regions of space, the chances of convincing them to return became virtually non-existent. But something about their disappearance bothered him. It was too clean, too complete. The humans were many things, but they were not cruel. They wouldn't simply abandon billions of sentient beings to suffer and die. "There's something else, sir," his aide continued. "We've been monitoring emergency communications from across the galaxy, and there's a pattern emerging. In every case where a critical system has failed, someone has received anonymous technical assistance." Kethvar's attention sharpened. "What kind of assistance?" "Detailed repair instructions, equipment specifications, even complete technical manuals transmitted from unknown sources. The data is always accurate and always arrives just in time to prevent complete disaster. But when we try to trace the sources, they lead nowhere," Kethvar finished. "The humans are still helping." It was a revelation that changed everything. The humans hadn't abandoned the galaxy out of spite or cruelty. They had withdrawn from official contact while continuing to provide aid in secret. It was, Kethvar realized, the most human response possible. Even while ending their formal relationships, they couldn't bring themselves to let people suffer if they could help it. This realization came to Chancellor Vexoth during an emergency session focused on the growing list of humanitarian crises. As reports flooded in of disasters narrowly averted by mysterious technical assistance, the pattern became impossible to ignore. "They're still here," he announced to the assembled representatives. "Not physically, perhaps, but they're monitoring our communications and providing aid when the situation becomes desperate." The Altarian representative's crystalline form flickered with agitation. "If they're still monitoring us, then we can communicate with them. Demand that they return to their responsibilities." "Demand?" Representative Yulton's voice dripped with incredulity. "Have you learned nothing from this crisis? We are in no position to demand anything. We are completely dependent on their goodwill for our survival." Chancellor Vexoth called for order, but the chamber remained chaotic. The reality of their situation was becoming clear to everyone, and the various species were responding with everything from panic to denial to desperate attempts to place blame. "Perhaps," suggested the Zilani ambassador, her tentacles moving in patterns that indicated deep thought, "we should consider why they're helping us even after leaving. What does that tell us about their motivations?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. For weeks, the council had been operating under the assumption that the humans had left out of anger or spite. But people motivated by anger didn't risk exposure to provide anonymous aid to their former enemies. Kethvar found himself thinking about every interaction he had ever had with human representatives. They had been passionate about justice, frustrated by bureaucracy, and impatient with corruption. But they had never been vindictive or cruel. Even their departure had been designed to minimize immediate harm. "They gave us 3 weeks," he said quietly. "What?" Chancellor Vexoth demanded. 3 weeks, Kethvar repeated, louder now. "They didn't just vanish overnight. The withdrawal took 3 weeks, moving from the outer systems inward. They gave us time to realize what was happening, time to prepare. And they've been providing emergency assistance ever since. This isn't punishment. This is. He paused, searching for the right word, then found it. Tough love. The concept was distinctly human, but it fit perfectly. The humans had removed themselves from official contact not to hurt the galaxy, but to force it to confront the reality of its dependence. They were teaching a lesson that could only be learned through experience. They want us to understand our own weaknesses, Kethvar continued. Every time we solve a problem without their direct intervention, we become a little more capable. Every time we fail and need their anonymous help, we become a little more humble. Representative Yulton was the first to grasp the full implications. They're not coming back until we change. Not just our policies or our attitudes, but our entire approach to galactic governance. They want us to grow up. The silence that followed was different from the panicked confusion that had characterized earlier sessions. This was the silence of people finally beginning to understand the true scope of what they faced. The humans weren't holding the galaxy hostage. They were offering it a chance to become something better. But change, especially fundamental change, would take time that they might not have. Each day brought new crises, new failures, new reminders of how much they had relied on human expertise and resources. The question was no longer whether they could survive without the humans, but whether they could evolve quickly enough to prove they deserved to have the humans return. In the depths of space, aboard ships whose locations remained hidden, human leaders monitored the galactic communications networks and watched as their former partners struggled with problems they had been solving for decades. Some argued for a quicker return, worried about the suffering their withdrawal was causing. Others insisted that any premature intervention would only perpetuate the cycle of dependency. Admiral Sarah Chen, former ambassador turned leader of the human exodus, made the decision that would define the next phase of the crisis. She authorized the expansion of their anonymous aid program, but with a crucial modification. Each piece of technical assistance would come with educational material designed to help other species understand not just how to fix the immediate problem, but why it had occurred and how to prevent it in the future. They would continue to help, but they would do so in a way that encouraged independence rather than dependence. It was a delicate balance, requiring careful judgment about when to intervene and when to let others struggle with problems they needed to learn to solve themselves. The galaxy was about to receive a very different kind of education than any its citizens had ever experienced. 6 months after the Great Silence began, Dr. Thekwan of the Vorthan Medical Institute made a discovery that would reshape how the galaxy understood both the crisis and themselves. She had been working desperately to replicate the human research on Kytherian plague treatment, struggling with methodologies that seemed to defy conventional scientific logic. "This is impossible," she muttered to her research assistant, a young Zolani named Vorist whose tentacles had turned purple with exhaustion. The humans were combining neural pathway research with quantum biology and somehow relating it to behavioral psychology. None of these fields should connect. Vorist looked up from her data analysis station, her large eyes reflecting the holographic displays around them. "Doctor, what if that's exactly the point? What if the reason we can't replicate their work isn't because we lack the knowledge, but because we lack their perspective?" Dr. Thekwan's breathing tubes fluttered with frustration. "What do you mean?" "I've been studying every piece of anonymous technical assistance we've received over the past 6 months, Vorist explained. "There's a pattern. The humans don't just solve problems. They see connections between things that we consider completely separate. They think differently." It was a revelation that Dr. Thekwan found both humbling and terrifying. The Vorthan were considered one of the most intellectually advanced species in the galaxy. Their logical, methodical approach to problems had produced countless scientific breakthroughs. But the human approach seemed to transcend logic, finding solutions by making intuitive leaps that somehow led to correct conclusions. "Show me," Dr. Thekwan demanded. Vorist activated a series of holographic displays showing the various technical solutions they had received. "Look at this repair manual for the atmospheric processors on New Harvest." The humans identified the problem not by analyzing the failing components, but by studying the social stress patterns of the workers operating the systems. They realized that the equipment failures were caused by subtle changes in worker behavior during shift changes. Dr. Thekwan studied the data, her 4 eyes widening with comprehension. They solved an engineering problem by understanding psychology. Exactly. And, here, Vorist continued, bringing up another display, when the life support systems failed on the Kepler mining station, the anonymous instructions didn't just tell them how to repair the immediate damage. They included a complete analysis of why Vorthan engineering philosophy made the systems vulnerable to that type of failure in the first place. The implications were staggering. The humans hadn't just been providing technical expertise to the galaxy. They had been providing a completely different way of thinking about problems. Their withdrawal hadn't just created a skills shortage. It had revealed a fundamental limitation in how every other species approached complex challenges. We've been trying to replace human solutions with our own methods, Dr. Thekwan realized. But what we really need to replace is human thinking. The same realization was occurring to problem solvers across the galaxy. On the manufacturing world of New Detroit, crystalline engineers were discovering that human production efficiency came not from superior technology, but from their ability to understand the psychological and social factors that affected worker productivity. On the research stations around Alpha Centauri, Nexari scientists were learning that human breakthrough discoveries often came from combining insights from completely unrelated fields. But perhaps the most important revelation came from an unexpected source: the criminal organizations that had been taking advantage of the chaos following the human withdrawal. Captain Vex Nar commanded one of the most feared pirate fleets in the Outer Rim. For months, he had been attacking merchant vessels and raiding colonies that no longer enjoyed human protection. His success had been so complete that other pirate organizations had begun copying his methods. Everything changed when he attempted to raid the supply depot on Titan Station. "Captain," his tactical officer reported, "the station's defenses are minimal. Standard civilian shields, no military escorts. This should be easy prey." Vex Nar nodded confidently. "Begin the attack. Target their shield generators first, then move in for boarding." But, as his ships closed on the station, something unexpected happened. The supposedly helpless civilian station began broadcasting a message on all frequencies. It wasn't a distress call or a surrender. It was an offer. "Attention raiding vessels," the message began. "We know you're attacking because you need resources for your crews. We're prepared to negotiate a peaceful transfer of supplies in exchange for protection services for this sector." Vex Nar's mandibles clicked with confusion. "What kind of trick is this?" "It's not a trick, Captain," his communications officer replied. "They're offering us a job. They want to hire us as security contractors." The concept was so foreign to pirate thinking that Vex Nar almost ordered the attack to continue anyway. But something made him pause. His crew was tired of constant fighting, and the promised payment was actually more than they could steal by force. "Open a channel," he ordered reluctantly. The conversation that followed changed everything. The station commander, an elderly Kytherian named Fulmore, explained that he had been studying human conflict resolution techniques from the anonymous educational materials they had been receiving. "The humans taught me something important," Fulmore said. "Most conflicts aren't really about resources. They're about respect, security, and purpose. You attack us because you need supplies and because raiding is the only life you know. But what if I could offer you all three things you really need, along with the supplies?" Vex Nar found himself actually considering the proposal. The human approach to piracy prevention wasn't to build bigger guns or thicker shields. It was to address the underlying motivations that created pirates in the first place. "What exactly are you suggesting?" he asked. "A partnership. You provide security for our trade routes, and we provide regular payment, supplies, and, most importantly, respect. You become protectors instead of predators. Your crew gets stability and purpose, and we get security." It was a solution so elegant that Vex Nar couldn't find fault with it. Within weeks, similar arrangements were being made across the Outer Rim as desperate station commanders applied human conflict resolution techniques to deal with the piracy crisis. The transformation didn't stop there. As species across the galaxy began studying and implementing human methodologies, they started to understand why the humans had been so successful as mediators and problem solvers. Ambassador Kethvar was among the first to grasp the broader implications. During a council session focused on the latest reports of successful crisis resolution using human techniques, he stood to address his colleagues. "Fellow representatives," he began, "I believe we have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of this crisis. We thought the humans left because they were angry or frustrated. We thought they were punishing us for our treatment of them. But I now believe their motivations were far more complex. The chamber fell silent, recognizing that Kethvar had become something of an expert on human behavior during the crisis. The humans didn't leave to hurt us, he continued. They left because they realized that our relationship had become unhealthy for everyone involved. We had become dependent on them to solve our problems, which prevented us from developing our own capabilities. Meanwhile, they had become trapped in a role that demanded they provide solutions without ever being allowed to implement systemic changes. Chancellor Vexoff leaned forward with interest. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that the humans orchestrated this withdrawal not as an ending, but as a beginning. They removed themselves from the equation so that we could discover our own potential. Every anonymous piece of assistance they've provided has included educational components designed to teach us their methods. They're not just helping us solve immediate problems. They're teaching us how to think like they do. Representative Yultun's voice carried a note of wonder. They're creating a galaxy full of species that can think like humans. More than that, Kethvar replied. They're creating a galaxy where human-style thinking is understood and valued by everyone. When they return, they won't be returning to the same political environment they left. They'll be returning to partners who finally understand how they approach problems. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility. For the first time since the crisis began, the assembled representatives weren't thinking about immediate disasters or emergency responses. They were thinking about the future and what it might look like when the humans finally came home. But, in the depths of space, Admiral Sarah Chan and her fellow human leaders were wrestling with their own complex emotions. Monitoring galactic communications had shown them the remarkable progress being made by species that were finally learning to think beyond their traditional limitations. The galaxy was becoming everything they had hoped it could be. The question now was whether they had taught their lessons well enough that their return would strengthen the new galactic community rather than recreate the old dependencies. It was a decision that would require wisdom, patience, and, perhaps most importantly, the kind of intuitive understanding of complex relationships that had made humans such effective mediators in the first place. The next phase of their plan would be the most delicate yet. It was time to begin the process of testing whether the galaxy was truly ready for their return. 1 year after the Great Silence, the first test came in the form of a message that appeared simultaneously on every major communication network in the galaxy. It was simple, direct, and unmistakably human in its approach. To the Galactic Council and all member species, we have been watching your progress with great interest. You have shown remarkable growth in your ability to solve complex problems and work together during this crisis. We would like to meet. The message included coordinates for a neutral system on the edge of known space and a proposed date for a diplomatic gathering. But it also included something that sent shockwaves through the galactic political establishment, a detailed analysis of every major decision the Council had made over the past year, complete with grades. Ambassador Kethvar stared at the evaluation document with a mixture of admiration and terror. The humans had been monitoring everything, analyzing every crisis response, every policy decision, every example of interspecies cooperation or conflict. They had turned the entire galaxy into a test case study. Look at this, he said to his aide, pointing to a section of the analysis. They've rated our response to the Kepler station crisis as adequate but inefficient. They note that we solved the immediate problem but failed to address the underlying issues that made the crisis possible in the first place. His aide's scales had shifted to a nervous yellow-green. Sir, they've graded everything. Our trade dispute resolution methods are marked as improvement needed. Our handling of the refugee crisis shows promise but lacks systematic thinking. Even our emergency response protocols are described as reactive rather than proactive. But it wasn't all criticism. The humans had also noted significant improvements in interspecies cooperation, innovative problem-solving approaches, and what they described as encouraging signs of systematic thinking development. They had highlighted specific examples where galactic leaders had successfully applied human-style methodologies to complex challenges. Chancellor Vexoff called an emergency session to discuss the human message, but the atmosphere in the chamber was unlike anything Kethvar had experienced in his centuries of service. Instead of the usual political posturing and species-centric arguments, representatives were actually studying the human analysis and discussing how to improve their performance. The question before us, Chancellor Vexoff announced, is whether we accept their invitation to meet. But I believe the real question is whether we're ready to face whatever tests they might have prepared for us. The Altarian representative, who had been humbled by a year of struggling with problems that humans had made look easy, spoke with unusual thoughtfulness. They've been preparing us for something. This entire year has been designed to teach us lessons we apparently needed to learn. The question is whether we've learned them well enough to satisfy our teachers. Representative Yiltun had spent the past year implementing human-style conflict resolution techniques in her home systems and had seen remarkable results. I think we should be more concerned about whether we've learned them well enough to satisfy ourselves. The humans aren't our teachers or our parents. They're our colleagues, and they've been trying to help us become worthy colleagues. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The galaxy needed the humans back, not just for their expertise, but for the completeness they brought to galactic civilization. The meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks hence. What the galactic representatives didn't know was that the humans had been preparing for this moment just as carefully as they had prepared for their departure. Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Diplomacy, the flagship of the human delegation, reviewing the detailed profiles her intelligence teams had compiled on every major galactic leader. They've changed, reported Dr. Marcus Webb, the chief analyst for the Human Diplomatic Corps. Not just their policies or their procedures, but their fundamental